she's all of the people we've ever known who have buried their trauma, but it's like beginning to implode their relationships with their loved ones now. And it has all along. And for the teenagers in those families where it's not being talked about, what is going, the kids don't know what's going on.
Welcome to Growing Inspiration, the podcast that nurtures your passion for the arts and creativity. I'm your host, Shayna McLean, and I'm thrilled to take you on this delightful journey through the vibrant world of arts and culture. In each episode, you can expect engaging interviews with a diverse range of artistic and creative individuals. We'll delve into what inspires them, explore their unique creative processes, and discover how their art enriches their lives. Together, we'll uncover the beauty of literature, the performing arts, the visual arts, food, wine, and spirits, and the inspiration gained through travel. Whether you're a connoisseur or just beginning your exploration, our conversations will inspire you to deepen your understanding and appreciation of the arts. So get ready to discover new perspectives, spark your creativity, and join a community of fellow art lovers. Today's guest is J.R.R. She's a best-selling author of a dozen books for teens and adults. The second book in her Carrick Hall series is called Once a Castle, and it just released 2 weeks ago. It continues the enchanting story begun in the best-selling and Christie Award-nominated Once a Queen. I met Sarah through the Madeleine L'Engle writing retreats that she co-directs with Sophronia Scott. As you will hear, Sarah is passionate about story and its ability to speak to teenagers as they look toward adulthood. But I also believe her writing can speak to all those who do not give up on fairy tales. Join me for this delightful conversation with J.R.R. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So glad to be with you.
This is a very busy season for you right now, as you have just launched your second book in the Carrick Hall series.
I have. Can I show it off?
Oh, please. Please.
So this was book one, came out last year, Once a Queen, young adult fantasy. And then Once a Castle is now here. And it's so pretty. And I kind of show it off like it's my new baby.
Yeah. Well, it is pretty. I love the cover art on both of them.
Yeah. And I've already seen the cover art for the third and final book in this trilogy, and it's gorgeous. And and I'm writing that book right now. So my whole, if you ask me questions and I answer and it doesn't make sense for Once a Castle, you'd be like, no, not yet, Sarah. Not Once a Crown. No spoilers yet.
So, just a quick question about that. Does your publisher find the cover artist, or is that someone you already knew?
Yeah, it's always the publisher. When you are, whether it's an illustrated book, like a children's book, or the cover art, generally speaking, the publishers do that work themselves. So they contract with artists and illustrators, and they will often have people in-house, but they also have a better sense of what those people are worth, right? Like what can they pitch and what should they pay? And the author should never be paying for that, any of it. I mean,
that's good to know.
I did pay for, I will say that if it's in the contract that if you want maps or illustrations or charts or graphs or whatever, that's generally your responsibility. So I hand drew maps that I then sent to a graphic designer that I know, who was actually, he was on staff at Tyndall House when my first books for teenagers came out, and he did these covers for Walking with Bilbo and Walking with Frodo, which, I mean, look at the spines, like incredible job. Oops, upside down.
Really pretty.
Jumped right off the shelf. And so I was like, I need to find Luke and see what he's up to, because I knew he was freelancing. And he took the illustrated maps that I'd done in my notebook and digitized them so that they were in a clarity of format that I would not be able to do on my own. So never do that work yourself unless it's absolutely in the contract. You should not be paying for that. No, you're a writer. That's your focus. So.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah. And for those who may not know yet about Once a Queen or Once a Castle, could you kind of give a bit of an overview without spoilers?
Yeah. You mean you want me to talk about my kids?
Exactly. Your babies.
I mean, I do have sons of my own that are now 14 and 11. And they actually figure pretty largely in this series too, because the background with Once a Queen is that in the midst of writing, I've written 12 nonfiction books now. Fiction has always been there. Like it's always been my original dream. It's always been what I've been making up in my head since I was a little kid. And so 20 years ago is when I first had the seed of the idea for Once a Queen. And my question, it was just a random day. I think I had just reread The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. And it's a series I love. I love Tolkien. I've written about all these guys. I love Madeleine L'Engle, which is how I know you, through the Madeleine L'Engle writing retreats. And those kind of classic authors have really shaped a lot of the landscape of my imagination, the way I think about art and creativity, and how we don't have to give that stuff up when we become grownups. For all three of those authors, that's a really big theme for them. And so, but I had finished the final book in the Chronicles of Narnia, and I was like, what gave C.S. Lewis the idea to, and this is sort of a spoiler, but the book has been around since 1952. So if people haven't read it, it's their own fault. In the last battle, at the end of it, you learn that there's been this huge train crash. And that's why there are all of these people from our world ending up in Aslan's country at the end. And it's essentially because they're dead. It's like it's the characters that star in the story are like dead children from our world. It's just a very strange narrative device. And I was like, where did he get the idea of a train crash on that scale? And why would that have been believable to his audience at the time? Turns out, so I Googled, I was like, British rail crashes, 1950s. And sure enough, in October of 1952, there had been the largest civilian British rail crash in its history. Still to this day, it was like 114 people-ish died. 300 or more were severely wounded. It was 3 trains colliding during rush hour on a weekday morning. So I was like, oh, and he was drafting The Last Battle that fall. So I thought, oh, here it is.
Okay.
This is it. And then I thought, I've always pondered the character of Susan, who is one of the children in the first book that we know and love, but she doesn't end up with the group of the beloved community at the end. And the reasons Lewis gives for that and the characters give for that are really flimsy. And it's been pointed out by lots of people before, but when you combine so the sense is that she's left in our world and now has lost all of her family to this horrific rail tragedy. And I was like, no. I want to know her better. But she's also every person we have ever known who maybe was once a person of like deep faith or belief, who has since either experienced skepticism to the level of I just walking away from it, or such trauma in their life that they cannot believe in a good and just universe anymore. And so I wanted to explore what would be the fallout of that in multi-generational relationships, right? So she's lost all these people. How does she then, she stays in our world, she becomes a mother, a grandmother. What does that do in multi-generational relationships? So that literally sitting at my desk, and in 5 minutes, it was all there. But And people ask me a lot if she is Susan. She is, but she's also all of the people we've ever known who have been on a journey and have buried their trauma, but it's beginning to implode their relationships with their loved ones now. And it has all along. And for the teenagers in those families where it's not being talked about, what is going, the kids don't know what's going on. They don't know if this is normal, if it's their fault that the adults are being weird. And it's my own story because I lost my grandmother when I was 14, and she had really disavowed any kind of faith, and pretty sure that trauma was a big part of that. But of course, that generation didn't talk about it.
Right.
So it's a story of loss. It's a story of walking alongside people and loving them anyway, when it's hard, and not giving up on them just because they don't inhabit the same internal spiritual world or belief system that you do.
Right. Right. And that's one of the things that struck me as I just finished Once a Queen yesterday, actually. And but, I know it's directed at teenagers really, but even as an adult, like thinking through like all of those relationships that I have had, or, and all the adults, it's like, wow, yeah, they really had a lot of stuff that they were dealing with, and maybe missed opportunities even to talk about that. My grandmothers have both passed, and, you can't go back and ask them and say, oh, I'm really sorry that I didn't pick up on, what was going on with you.
And it's weird because they're the grown up, right? Like they, we look to them to kind of be the wisdom and the guidance and the, whatever we look to our elders for. And they likewise are trying to protect us. I mean, some of their silence is out of a desire to not give you more to carry than you can bear as a child and a teenager. But part of what my main character is Eva. She's 14. She's from the United States. She's meeting her British grandmother for the first time. Part of what Eva's mother has to figure out, because the big rift is between the mother and the grandmother, is how and when to bring this into Eva's understanding of their family history. And when is Eva like old enough really to bear? And she's also wanting Eva to be able to develop her own relationship with the grandmother without prescribing like, this woman is terrible, she ruined my life. Like, she really wants Eva to be able to have a relationship with her without it being clouded by her mother's own experience. So she's trying to give this very complex older woman the dignity of being human, which is a phrase I learned from Charlotte Jones Voigtlis, Madeleine L'Engle's granddaughter.
That's great.
Yeah. Here we are as women with all these layers. And I have found that other readers like you have really connected with that, those unexplored questions and conversations in their families. And like Madeleine L'Engle, we're all the ages we have ever been. So we get to be the 14-year-old reading it,
Right.
The 14-year-old we were.
Yes. And that's the other thing, the whole feel of the book reminded me so much of reading Lewis or Tolkien. And can you tell, my listeners a little bit, who may not know you very well, about how much of an influence that has been over your life and your writing?
Oh yeah. I can't separate the story of my journey as a writer without talking about any of them, not only because I've published books about them. My first book was called Walking with Frodo. It was looking at spiritual themes in the Lord of the Rings for teenagers. And then I wrote Walking Through the Wardrobe about Narnia. And I wrote A Light So Lovely, The Spiritual Legacy of Madeleine L'Engle, which is a biography.
I've got that right here.
Oh yeah, there she is. It's funny. We should like switch sides of my screen and like match up. That actually would look really terrifying. So I've so immersed myself in their stories, but in part because I've always loved them so much. I figured might as well write about stuff that won't bore me. But the mode of fairy tale in particular, and both Lewis and Tolkien talk about that in some of their nonfiction writing. Fairy tale and fantasy, although I think Tolkien would say what he was writing was fairy tale, is a mode where you get to explore the idea of the potential for other worlds to kind of mirror what's happening in ours, while allowing the reader to come in and kind of explore that world on their own. You're not foreclosing on what they're supposed to know and understand. And at least in the case of Lewis, you have a kind of strong narrative voice that's guiding the reader. It's the once upon a time kind of voice. And there's a way that puts us in like a less skeptical or like a trusting, it's a default mode of trust, because once again, we're now the young child sitting next to the loving parent who's reading us a story before bedtime, and we're ready to accept or engage in ways that other genres, like when I'm reading detective fiction, it's a whole different thing. Like I'm reading to solve a problem and figure out what's going on. I'm not reading with like my arms open, just letting it wash over me.
Yeah.
And so there's that. But then also I'm a trained theologian, as you know, and I'm really interested in that idea that we see Lewis and Tolkien, especially Lewis, wrestling with and experimenting with, of other worlds kind of breaking in on this, that you could literally go around the corner at any moment and find, an elf walking down the street. It's like, we don't know, like what's out there. And I love what that genre allows us to explore, especially portal fantasy in particular, and magical realism. Those are kind of the spaces I like to inhabit.
Yes. And I love that, that aspect, everyone from Charles Williams talking about, in the place of the lion, archetypes breaking in.
Yes. Those platonic ideals of like beauty and truth and goodness, and even like, he makes those concrete in our world. If you were to look out the window and there was a giant lion like walking through your backyard, and yet those sort of spiritual realities, depending on where people are in their spiritual journey, or what they believe or don't believe, those matter tremendously, and they impact daily life if we pause to pay attention, right? And so what Eva's trying to figure out in book 1 is, are these stories that she grew up hearing, these fairy tales, does she have to give those up now that she's making the turn towards adulthood? Does she have to give up that belief and that love? And are they true? Like, right? Like, can we get there to these other worlds? And also, why is grandmother so weird about those stories? And she begins to realize, she begins to suspect that her grandmother's story is inseparable from those fairy tales, because she was in fact a character in them, but has now kind of shut her heart, both the beauty and pain of those memories.
Right. In the second book, I understand that you kind of have the two main characters in the first one were Eva and Frankie. They were like the main young people, but now you've taken the point of view of some of Frankie's younger siblings.
Correct. Yeah. So in the first book, it's all Eva's first person perspective. So we only know as much as Eva knows. But in Once a Castle, I made the rather unwise choice of having 5 points of view. 0 out of 10 stars, not recommended as a writer. Don't do this ever. Because you're essentially writing 5 novels, because you have to get each character introduced with all of you have to have their character arc interwoven with the larger plot. You have to bring it to some sort of resolution for each of them. But it was an exercise in the power of of the world that you've created to be translatable into these other voices and scenarios. And I'm just really grateful for my characters, because they showed up and taught me what I needed to know about who they were and where the story was going. So Frankie's sibling, it's several years after Once a Queen, the end of Once a Queen. Frankie's siblings are now teenagers, and one is a preteen, very precocious 12-year-old. But we also have some friends of theirs, and one is Arash Tabari, who is the grandson of the Rastagars. So if you read the book, we'll recognize the refugee family from Iran that Eva's family gets to know. So it's their grandson, Arash. And also a character from the fairy tale world of Ternival, and her name is Zara. And both Arash and Zara have a kind of Persianate background, and that's on purpose because I have a bit of an argument with Lewis and Tolkien and classic fairy tales about the ways that people of Middle Eastern medieval cultures are depicted.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is shaped by the fairy tales that those authors grew up hearing, European fairy tales that were really forged as oral stories during the Crusades. And I don't agree that we can just accept those tropes without investigating them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I give Arash and Zara as much airtime as everybody else. And by the end, we begin to realize that their stories are so intertwined with Once a Queen and the tales we've heard so far that you can't tell one without the other. So,
wow.
So
I'm looking forward to that.
It was a lot to try to do in one book.
Yeah.
But I love people's response to it so far. It's been so delightful.
Oh, good. Good.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about, your characters and fitting them into the world. Could you talk a little bit about world building and how you developed this space? Because it's not Narnia and it's not Middle Earth. It's a different space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the first kind of iteration of Once a Queen, you heard 20 years ago, I really did have this sense of a Narnia-esque world, where I wanted to evoke that so that the reader realized they were in a somewhat familiar space, but then it was like a parable where I was going to kind of turn it a little bit so that it takes us somewhere we weren't necessarily expecting to go. So it's an homage to Lewis and Tolkien, but it's also my way of saying, well, what if these stories are written by women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what if the queens become, there's a high queen and there's, I wouldn't call myself a feminist, but I do like to empower the girls that are reading my stories to visualize a different understanding of what if it's a queendom instead of a kingdom? Like how do we and how, when you empower girls and young women, they also have to reckon with their own mistakes now, right? Like just because you're not in charge, doesn't mean that you're like innocent. Like once you are in charge, you will make mistakes too. So like, how do you navigate those with the people you love? So there's elements of that, but I did layer over time with reader feedback and editorial feedback. We did layer in much more uniqueness to the fairy tale world, even though it echoes a lot of these other authors and locations, such that, as one one beta reader said, it needs to stand on its own feet. It's got to have its own scaffolding behind everything,
right?
Such that if somebody's never read Narnia, they can still engage it. So, yeah.
Yes. And I think it did a fabulous job of doing so. It kind of had that feel.
It was a lot of work, so I'm glad to hear it.
And as a writer, I'm still at the beginnings of my own works, but in speculative fiction, there's always that tension of like, well, how much do I explain, and how much do I just leave to everyone's imagination? Because everyone who reads it's their own story in their own head, and so how do you navigate that tension?
I think that probably the biggest challenge when we first start writing fiction of any kind is how much backstory are you giving up front, and how much are you trusting your reader to plug in what they need to plug in that's going to get them to where you need them to be. And how do you layer in that backstory through things like dialogue and quick descriptors that don't have to be this whole long story. So Annie Dillard would say, if you're writing fiction, write and then cut the first 3 chapters. Basically, your story actually starts in chapter 4. So cut all the backstory and the throat clearing and the whatever. And I like to work in Scrivener, which is it has a binder concept to the way that it's outlined. And you always can see in like the left-hand column, the different components of the story, but it also has space where it's a binder. So it's like a scrapbook, like you're throwing images, like links to images and uploading PDFs, and not all of that, like when you compile it into a manuscript, not all that's going to be in there, but that's your space. Like it has space for you to write your character descriptions and your backstory and your timelines and all of that. And just because you've written it doesn't mean it has to go in the book in that way.
Right.
But yeah, it's a huge challenge. So I kind of have a 3-part rule for the backstory, particularly in those first 3 chapters. One is trust the reader. The second is leverage dialogue to deliver without being pedantic. And what's the third? What can you say in like an aside or a phrase that captures a lot of things in it? And I could find a description if you want.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is at the beginning of Once a Castle. And remember, I have 5 different voices. So I had to do this multiple times. And even like a character's personality, you're going to evoke that through dialogue a lot. And their sort of internal asides to themselves, instead of Tilly was the oldest daughter in the, Addison family. But so so Tilly, she is the oldest daughter in the Addison family, but I introduced her and some of her siblings of Frankie's siblings this way. Giants again, said Tilly's little brother, Georgie. He sat contentedly at the breakfast table in the Addison's cottage, slurping chocolate milk through a straw, loudly, as only a 9-year-old can do. That's what thunder is, when giants play at 9 pins. No, silly, that wasn't thunder. Tilly play-swatted the back of his head as she walked past his chair. Just the crews getting ready down at the green. How much chocolate powder did you put in there anyway? She stood in front of the mirror and twisted her long, dark hair into a messy topknot. She could just picture her sugar-hyped little brother terrorizing the village of Upper Wolvern while she was at work on Midsummer Festival weekend, no less. Okay, so what have you learned about these two and the setting in those literally like 200 words or less?
Right.
Might even be 100 words.
You put so much into that. We know they're in a cottage, that he's 9, she's a little older, she's got long hair. They live in a village. And there are people working to set up the festival. She's going to be working at the festival, and that they're in England, if you didn't know that already.
I mean, you know that from my accent,
phrase. But even the playing at 9 pins, that's not necessarily an American phrase.
Right. That's good. So. That's good. I didn't even notice that. Let's see.
And chocolate powder.
And you get a sense of his personality. What do we know about George?
Yeah, that he's
precocious.
He's a boy.
He's a boy. He's going to do kind of what he wants with the amount of sugar in his hot cocoa. And he's also a truth teller. So it is in fact giants that they're hearing and not thunder. And so, that's the reader knows that. And so they're chuckling right now because of course, if a child says that with older people, no one's going to believe them, but he's actually right. And Georgie is pretty much right from that point on through the rest of the book, even though he sounds like a very fanciful, imaginative 9-year-old. So we start to learn, like, if you want to know the truth, you've listened to Georgie, right?
Right. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that insight.
So I'm leveraging description and dialogue. Dialogues. I mean, Jane Austen does this. In fact, C.S. Lewis read Pride and Prejudice every year because dialogue does such heavy lifting in that book, and especially the opening pages and what you learn about the Bennet family and their village. And I mean, we meet all the main characters just in what Mrs. Bennet is saying. So.
Right. So, To stay on kind of the topic of your writing process, you mentioned that you've done a number of nonfiction books before you turned to fiction.
Yes.
Would you say there's a significant difference in the way that you approach those two types of works?
Yes and no. I think part of my challenge right now, and as I'm writing my third, I've written tons of fiction, but not on a deadline, So I have always treated fiction as kind of a bit more of a muse inspiration driven process without a lot of discipline. And I know you're interviewing Carrie Wallace and her book, The Discipline of Inspiration, as part of this podcast. And I would highly recommend that to anybody who's creating anything, because there is, with me, I'm learning the discipline of showing up. And as Madeleine L'Engle would say, to serve the work, and specifically to serve the characters. Whereas with my nonfiction, I feel like I was much more serving the readers, because you're delivering a really specific message in nonfiction, or you're sustaining an argument or a point over an entire book, and you're just continually driving at that. And there's something about the way my brain works that does that almost effortlessly. Like, I keep thinking in the middle of this draft for the third book, like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like, just go back to writing nonfiction. You could crank those suckers out in like 2 months. You get paid, and then you can like move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So there's very much like, this feels like I am carving worlds out of marble with my fingernails. And there are a lot of days where I wake up and I'm like, I don't have it in me, but I have to serve the work. Georgie is not going to let me just sit around. He wants my attention. And it requires, I think, a lot more reader feedback, because you may think that you are world building in a way that's clear, but readers you can trust the reader I hope to tell you, I do not get how old this person is. Like, I don't understand their motivations. In this chapter, they're like sure of themselves. And in this chapter, they're like a hot mess of uncertainty. What's going on? So it's very, it does feel very different to me, but I still need to leverage the skills I've learned doing those reps in writing other books and meeting other deadlines. Because I've done this before. Like, I need to
Madeleine used to, she talked about doing your finger exercises. And
yes, this is reps for absolutely any kind of writing you do is reps. It's like my son's going to soccer practice and doing shots on goal over and over and over. But at a certain point you have to play the game. Like, you have to get in the game. And that's where, a publishing contract and a deadline means I don't have the luxury of just doing shots on goal. I don't have time. I gotta trust that I know what I'm doing, and I need to trust my characters to show up and tell me who they are and what they need.
For reader feedback, I noticed in your endnotes to the first book that you thanked a couple of different writing groups that you're part of.
Yes.
How does writing in community like that help you?
Well, and I was thanking 2 writers groups in Northern Michigan, which is where the initial drafts of this book developed. And I now live in mid-Michigan after being away for graduate school and coming back to the state in a different city. And my, what I loved about those writers groups is that one of them was actually a romance writers group, and they know that it is really obvious how a romance writer adores their characters. And I was getting feedback like, I don't think you love the grandmother. And what's like, she's not a very compelling character. Like, you kind of hate her. And I'm like, what? So trust a romance writer to be like, come on, we need to root for her too, not just Eva, the granddaughter. I was like, okay. So, because at one point they were like, she sounds like Cruella DeVille. She even had a cigarette. I was like, oh my gosh. And so did my grandmother how to sing.
Yeah.
Bless her. So yeah, that was super important. And then the other writers group I was in was a multi-genre, just a community writing group. And some of those people are now still some of my best friends. And they asked really great questions about like how this book could stand on its own 2 feet without relying so much on Narnia and Middle Earth. And how do you invite readers in who, how do you write for a broader audience, even though your character is 14 or 15? Right. Because they were the ones who told me a lot of people are going to love this book, like multiple generations. So, how can you kind of broaden the conversation in a multi-generational context while driving at Eva's experience, her limited view. Right. So that was just beautiful. I mean, these were all MFA like trained, trained composition teachers and stuff. So they pushed me in the craft.
Right. Yeah.
But now, so with Once a Castle, as I was drafting this book, I read the draft chapters to my sons at bedtime every night. And I'm doing the same with Once a Crown. And so they are my beta readers and my feedback group. And there's nothing like a middle school boy to tell you exactly where it's weird or awkward or even sus, or like you're using the word, they're like, Mom, you don't know what that means right now. Like, you're so old, you don't know what that means. Okay. So there's a lot of them in these books, and I'm grateful. I mean, they're my audience. I get to write for my kids right now in the age range. My son is 14. It's crazy.
I bet that's really special for them too,
I mean, I think it is, but also like, this is just what we do. Like, maybe later they'll be like, wow, that was weird. We read my mom's like, but they'll also be like, I don't know any other friends whose mom is a writer. And then when I did do an unboxing video, and their faces when they picked this book, I mean, they named some of the characters and came up with some of the scenes. So
that's awesome.
Book of my heart.
Yeah. And so, how did kind of transitioning to the Madeleine L'Engle writing retreats? That's how I first became aware of of you and got to know you a little bit. Even back at the Madeleine mornings back in 2021, I loved those. Got so much out of those. How did those? What was the genesis of that, and kind of what's the impact been over the years?
Yeah. So the first way that my path intersected with all things Madeleine was the invitation from Zondervan to write a book about her, as the spiritual biography that we mentioned, A Light So Lovely. And I really wanted to show her influence on present day influencers and everyday people. So I interviewed everyone from like Philip Yancey, who's a well-known author in Christian circles, to Sarah Zarr, who's a YA novelist, and Madeleine's own granddaughter, Charlotte, who is the executor of her estate and runs all of Madeleine's online presence and does all of the brokering of like what's going on with her published work and all of that. And through that, Charlotte and I really hit it off, and we became pretty close, and we're still very close. And she then invited me to co-direct the very first Madeleine L'Engle literary conference in New York City in November of 2019. So I co-directed that with Brian Elaine of Writing for Your Life, and with Charlotte, who was like our behind the scenes fairy godmother, making it all happen. It was at All Angels Church, which is where Madeleine had worshiped towards the end of her life in New York City. And it was just this amazing weekend packed with all kinds of, we had Catherine Patterson, who wrote Bridge to Terabithia, was the keynote speaker. And I got to introduce her.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I think I've arrived. Like, I don't know what's after this. Like, my job here is done.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the plan was then to do like a writing retreat the following year at a retreat center somewhere in Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
you know, not super far from New York. But then COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So Sophronia Scott, who I had asked if she would co-direct a writing retreat with me, she had come to do a journaling workshop at the conference, and I had already known her pretty well from other events. We decided to pivot, which was the word at the time in the pandemic, to those online Madeleine mornings, which was like a shorter 4-hour Saturday morning retreat to get a little bit of writing done, like ignite your, get re-inspired to work on your own, the dream, the writing of your own heart. And those were wonderful. They were wonderful.
They really
and
were.
then as the world opened back up again, we were able to start doing in-person retreats. And the first two were at Wisdom House in Litchfield, Connecticut, fall retreats. And that was a spiritual retreat center that Madeleine had led retreats at a lot because it was close to where she lived at Crosswicks in summers. So that was delightful. And then last year we teamed up with the Northern Michigan C.S. Lewis Festival because Sophronia and I were keynote speakers there. So last fall we were in Northern Michigan in my home state. And now Sophronia has moved here from Connecticut. So she lives in Michigan now. So it's her home state too. And we did it sort of in tandem with the Lewis Festival and talked about C.S. Lewis and Madeleine L'Engle. And Thomas Merton, Sophronia's in it.
Yeah, that's right.
So 3 spiritual writers from the 20th century.
And now you're a founding board member of the C.S. Lewis Festival, is that right?
I am. Yeah, my husband and I are. My family's from Northern Michigan. That's where we lived when we were first married. And the festival has been around. I think it's going to be like its 23rd year this fall. So I've been involved for a long time in shaping the content and the speaking roster and moderating conversations during those fall weekends. But the whole community gets involved. There's like churches do reading groups and local kids theaters stage The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And restaurants will have like Lewis and Narnia inspired items on their menus, and like Petoskey becomes this like the tagline is to Narnia and the North.
That's awesome.
So it was just lovely, and we're still trying to figure out how all of that could work for 2025. And there's lots of moving parts to life at this stage in the game for us. So we're still figuring it out.
That's wonderful. You mentioned already that you've got the 3rd book coming out next year. And so that's going to kind of, I guess, tie up. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that without giving spoilers for the
spoilers. No, it's good. It's good for me to try to summarize what feels like a hot mess right now. Because so one of the themes is weaving in this trilogy, and there are so many loose threads at the moment that may not get tied up. I hope they will. So that's a huge challenge. I think part of my problem was that I was like, in the first book, I was like, well, let's just throw a bunch of stuff in there that we could maybe work with in books 2 and 3. And now it's like, oh, that was so dumb. Wow. Like I should have figured all that out before. But remember, Once a Queen was going to be a standalone. I did not write it with a whole series in mind. That came about as my agent was pitching it to publishing houses. Wow. So Waterbrook is my publisher, and my editor is someone I've known for decades. And she knew of Once a Queen and had read early iterations of it. I was like, I really, really, really want to look at this book. But in the proposal, I think you're going to need to list some possible sequels because that's a big deal in publishing. Huge, especially with young adult. And they really want to crank them out one a year because those kids grow up so fast.
Right. Huh.
So,
I thought about that.
you know, if you have not gotten them the next book, they're on to a different series, right? And you have to try to get on their radar. The world moves so fast for these kids. So, and they move so fast. Oh my gosh, they grow up so fast. So we just put some stuff in the proposal, like, oh, I don't know, how about like Once a Kingdom, and I don't know, like what about, and like a sentence of what could happen in those books. Which gave me like zero direction once I finally got a contract, and it was a 3-book contract. And I was like, oh, that means okay. So towards the end of drafting the final drafts of Once a Queen in preparation for publication, knowing that there would be subsequent books, I layered in, like I kind of reintroduced Frankie's siblings towards the end, and as a setup, you just know they're going to play some sort of role.
Right.
I leave a number of things unresolved. Now that the stag tapestry has been moved from Carrick Hall to Woolvern Court, will the stag show up in our world again?
Right. Yeah.
Or is he now out of the picture, like literally? So you have the 2 younger girls talking about that. And of course, they come right back to that in their first scene. Have you seen the stag anywhere near your house, Aurora, at Woolvern Court? No, like they're heartbroken. Like, won't we get a chance to have adventures like Frankie and Eva did? Right.
Right.
Oh, but of course they will. So Once a Crown is the name of book 3. And I'm taking that we're beginning to see those intertwining stories between the Persianate characters and our British characters and American characters. And I'm beginning to deepen that sense of we cannot tell one story without the other. And how they're all connected and even potentially related. And like just this sense that, that when we treat those who are different from us as the other, we really do deny their humanity, but we also diminish our own humanity, right? So it's the reverse of what we think we're doing. And we forget that we are all part of a great story, many stories that began long before we got here and will continue long after we're gone. And if we don't tell those stories with integrity, right, about the actual honest truth about those stories, we will forget our common humanity. And it's not to erase difference, but it is to acknowledge difference and say, oh, and that is my brother, that is my sister, that is we are part of this family together.
Right.
And if I tell this story thinking that it's completely separate from yours, I'm not telling it truthfully. So that's kind of the main driving vision. And I introduce a new character. His name is Bijan, and we don't know why he's there, but we begin to see that he plays an inseparable role as kind of the final link in the final image in the tapestry, if you will.
Right.
Thing.
Huh. Oh, so there's a lot to look forward to.
Yay! I'm so excited. Yeah, I hope I can pull it off.
So
January of 2026 is the pub date for that.
Awesome.
Once a Crown.
And Once a Castle just came out a week or so ago.
Yeah. Yep.
2 weeks tomorrow, I guess. And so people will be able to find that wherever you can find books.
Yep. It released in all formats. There's no hardcover, so it's softcover, ebook, and audiobook. Oh, and the audiobook is so great. I'm listening to it right now, and it just because it's being interpreted by a voice actor, it feels like a whole new story to me.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm finding places where it needed edits and not glaring, but also ways that he's interpreting the characters. And I'm like, oh, he's a genius. It's been wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is it the same actor as did the first one?
No. So it's really interesting. Shakira Shute, who did the first one, did a beautiful job with all the voices. She's a native British, it's British English, but she can do American accents and all this stuff. But she wasn't available for this, and she was just heartbroken. But Fajr Al-Qaisi. So we have a male narrator this time, which is great because we have male characters in the story, in Jack and Arash. And he really captures Arash's experience as the child of refugees in England, in the way that he's telling his story, and he can express through the Rastegar family and through the Persianate characters in Ternival, their manner of speech and pronunciations in ways that like I can't, right? So his interpretive framework adds such a depth and richness to the story. It's way more than any author deserves, honestly. And I'm so grateful for him. And then Vidish Athavali reads the fairy tale excerpts from the end that it's like an appendix, but we realized like, oh, wait a minute. These are actually quite crucial to what happens next.
Right. And we didn't even have a chance to get into that, the story within the story there. So everyone's just going to have to pick up the books for themselves.
Right. Well, and in Once a Queen, I got to read the fairy tale interstitials between
awesome.
Shakira's narration of the main story. And I got to use a British accent. They allowed me to do that. And I loved every minute of it.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, I'm so excited for everyone to find Ternival and learn about the world there and all the characters that you've created. And thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, it was lovely. Thank you so much. Your questions are great. And I do hope that it inspires people to keep writing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Growing Inspiration. I hope you found today's conversation as inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to subscribe and share it with your friends. To dive deeper into the world of arts and creativity, visit my website at gardenofmydelights.com for exclusive content and resources, including show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter for the latest updates and insights. You can also connect with me on Instagram for more inspiration at Garden of My Delights. Until next time, keep nurturing your creativity and looking for beauty and wisdom all around you.